Welcome to the Revenue Above Replacement podcast. I'm your host, Adam Grossman. With me today is Alex Kane. Alex, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Adam.
Yeah, thanks for joining. And we like to start this podcast the way we like to start every podcast, which is tell us a little bit more about your background and how you got to your position that you're currently in right now.
Sure. My background by education is business law and finance. I attended and graduated from Drexel University in 2017. And I started initially as a business law major, and then I added a finance major after my first co-op opportunity. Drexel is on the quarter system. So did 6 months at a law office, realized that I maybe wanted to try something new. I added finance as a major, and immediately I was, uh, you know, hooked. Learning how to value a company, what a stock option is. I took a whole course on stock options, and I just thought to myself, "Wow, this is kind of crazy. You can literally bet on the price direction of a company in the most obtuse way. It's very clean. You don't have to buy the stock. You can literally buy a bet, an option, or a future. And if that future or option increases in price, you can make a profit." And when I was at Drexel, I started to dabble into stock trading because a lot of the kids in the finance program wanted to sort of, we had access to FactSet and to Bloomberg, and we were learning how to value a company. And we learned that, every so often companies come out with earnings. And so we started to trade those blue chip stocks because everyone around me was using Robinhood. It was easy to sign up. It was mobile. It was snappy. It spoke to us. It was commission free. And what I realized was a lot of the students were gambling. To me, there's not a huge difference between like buying the Phillies or buying Apple stock or an Apple call option or put option. And that's when it hit me that, someone is going to create a sports betting app if sports betting ever became legal. This is back in 2016. That mimics the ease and approachability and the transparency and the sleekness of Robinhood. And so that's how it started. We can get into like how it came to be, but that was the idea. I graduated and I was like, I want to create an exchange for sports betting. Sports betting wasn't even legal at the time. It was a wild idea. I had no idea. I had no background in technology. I had no idea how to build an exchange. I sat there and I thought to myself, like, okay, well, if I can build something that looks like a stock exchange, that's probably a good place to start. And then I sat there and like, I don't even know how a price of a company comes to be. Like, I know how to value a free cash flow of a company and work your way back and discount the cash flows to arrive at a net present value. But like, what is Apple $154 per share? Like, who comes up with that? And so thus began a very long journey in terms of how to build an electronic marketplace.
Yeah, I think we definitely want to talk about Sporttrade. Obviously, that's how you and I got connected for an article that I ended up writing for John Wall Street, which we definitely want to get into. But before we do that, I kind of want to start at the beginning. A lot of our audience are either currently playing sports in college or have played sports in college, including myself. I know you did that from a varsity golf perspective, and that led you to start your first venture in the golf space. So can you talk about your experience kind of leveraging your experience, you're leveraging your past as an athlete, how that helped you start your first company and how you think of it impacting your work today?
100%. I still remember where I was. So I played golf in college. I was a golf nut. I watched every single golf tour there was. Even today, I look at a golfer and sometimes I could just tell by like the way they're approaching the ball. I'm like, oh, that's so-and-so. Which is pretty sad, to be honest. What sport did you play in college?
I played soccer.
Okay,
Very
great.
poorly, but I played soccer in college, yes.
Well, I played golf even poorer. Yes, I guarantee. And I watched Moneyball, and that was almost a life-changing movie to me. I watched the movie 21, and I began to realize that you could use statistics and mathematics to gain an edge. And I just thought, and still think that's the coolest thing in the world. And as a golfer, I began to learn more about advanced analytics in golf. It was a book written by Mark Brody, came out in 2013, called Every Shot Counts. And that book changed my life. If for those that don't know, there's this kind of methodology that Mark Brody essentially discovered, which is Moneyball for golf. That every shot you are gaining or losing strokes on an expected value basis to the field. It's a very simple concept. If you start on a par 4 and it's 400 yards away, And from 40 yards away, the average tour pro scores exactly a 4. And you hit a 330-yard drive right down the center of the fairway. And now you're 70 yards away. The expected average from there is around 2.5, 2.4. You've picked up zero 0.6 shots. You've used one, so now you're at 3, but you have an expected value of 2.4 from there. Picked up 0.6 shots. And you can do that on every single shot throughout the round. And you can adjust it to what the field is doing on that course on that day. And now if you watch an elite telecast, strokes gained is what everyone talks about. They don't really talk about fairways hit or greens hit or total putts or total driving. And Mark Brody does this incredible job of basically eviscerating the argument that those statistics matter at all. It literally was Moneyball for golf. I remember where I was at Borders. I picked the book up. I walked out of the parking lot and I didn't even leave the parking lot. I read the whole book 2 hours and I was just hooked. And I just thought to myself, if people aren't doing this, like the end of the movie, The Moneyball, if people aren't doing this tomorrow, they're gonna knock me on tour anymore. If people are still counting how many putts they hit, how many fairways they hit, either making the wrong decisions. And so immediately I did it for myself and I started to do it for others. And I worked with one of my best friends who now is on the management team here at Sporttrade. And we started to build these spreadsheets that you could calculate strokes gained. And then we figured out you could scrape PGA Tour websites and do it for the same. And then I began to realize that there are PGA Tour pros that weren't thinking this way. And so we've approached our first one through a mutual connection and begun to collect his data and run automated reports and then share it each Monday and say, you need to work on your putting from 3 to 6 feet. You need to do this, you need to do that. And that really started a project, which became a company in college called Tour Stat Analytics. And it was really a side project. And I learned how to try to sell a client and how to, break down the data because I like to nerd out about it and maybe others don't in a very consumable fashion. And that was one of the coolest experiences I've ever had. So that was this kind of story of like trying to share that Moneyball thought process with competent professionals that actually could do something with the data. And now every single tour pro has analytics people on their team, 200 of them on the PGA Tour. And back in 2013, 2014, less than 10% of the tour had that. So it was really cool to be a part of that.
Yeah, I did want to drill into the selling component. So what did you learn about selling? Selling is going to be something that, or we talk to our students about and and the audience is probably familiar with, but what did you learn, particularly given what you said, this audience is professional golfers who are used to, potentially hearing sales pitches in a variety of different contexts?
Yes, I learned that perceived value is way more important to a customer than actual value. That to me, the actual value of being able to say, hey, if you have 25 hours to practice between now and the next event, and you're spend 17 of them on this, I can save you 17 hours, is a lot of value to me, knowing how important the data is and how insightful it is. For a tour pro that has a college kid walking up to them with a pencil behind the ear and a spreadsheet, essentially, there's no way that's going to stick. And so what essentially we did is we gave it away for free and said, and worked with the coach actually to work it into part of his routine. So it was less the tour pro making the decision around, I'm going to change the way I approach training, and more working with the coach who was the mutual connection, who was a huge believer in strokes gained, started to work that in. And then we started to try to work with other pros, and we sent out sample reports to like all these pros and their agents. And then what I realized is like Mark Brody was also starting to do it. And I'm like, okay, well, he's come up with it. He has the official data. He doesn't have to scrape the PGA Tour website. He has the direct shot link thing. And then I thought to myself, like, I gotta go to the PGA Tour and work for them because they could sell this directly to their 1099s, and their 1099s are the pros who I think are contractors. And at that point, I was in college. I was like, I would love to do something like this full time, but it's clear there's not actually a business here. It was more of like a very fun project. And that was my first lesson of like, you have to create so much value for your customer for them to even consider paying you 1 cent. And if you just absorb that as a fact, it will be very fruitful, I think, for you.
And then how did that lesson, at least at a high level, because I don't think our audience maybe has as much familiarity with like how stock exchange works and stock prices. So I want to get into that. But um, at a high level, how did that experience inform your desire or interest in starting another company? And what did you learn from that experience that maybe helped factor into the start of Sport Trade?
Yes, I think a couple of things. One, I learned how critical it was to how valuable it is to have technologists on your team. Even the person, David, that I worked with, that was his name, David, had skills set having to do with like SQL that I just did not possess. And that was a very early lesson for me of like any business that is scalable in any way, shape, or form has technology at the epicenter. So any sort of technology, any sort of business you're going to build, even something as simple as what I tried to come up with, is fundamentally a technology company. Sales are the engine that drives growth, but technology is what enables the transactions or value to be created. And I was not a technologist. So that was a very important lesson to me of like, oh, I need to be very strong in that sort of capacity by bringing that core competency into the realm, into the founding sort of ethos of the company. That was one thing I learned. And it was just really great, even as a student, to not be looked at as a student, to be looked at as someone selling a service than someone that had a quote unquote company. I mean, it really was more of a side project, but even going through the process ultimately of forming Sport Trade as a business law major of like, I know how to submit. First Sport Trade was actually an LLC, and we put some intellectual property there, provisional patent application, a trademark, and then ultimately in 2018, converted the LLC to a C Corp, knowing how to do that and like file the paperwork with the Delaware Secretary of State, and then know enough when to bring an actual attorney in was really helpful as well. And yeah, thus began a 2-year sort of period where I really didn't know what I was doing, and I learned a ton kind of on the fly. And my last year at Drexel, I was like one course away from being a minor in entrepreneurship. And Chuck Sacco, who runs the entrepreneurship program at Drexel, when I talked to him about it, he was like, just go do it. That's what you're going to do after college and try to start this crazy business, don't take another course and stay here another quarter. So you can just go do entrepreneurship. And so I was pushed off and I began Sport Trade journey.
And yeah, again, I definitely want to get into Sport Trade and even just some things that you and I talked about in terms of like sports betting concepts more generally and what goes on and why you started. But just to start out with, you mentioned Robinhood and stock exchanges and commission free and sleek trading. Like, can you just give a short primer on like how that works? Like, how does stock exchanges work? Like, how does Robinhood work? And how do typical, when people are buying or selling stocks, why do they do that? And you mentioned options too. We could go into that, but just the basics, like these are why stock exchanges exist and how they work and why Robinhood originally maybe achieved success that it did.
Yeah. So stock exchanges, and specifically the US online equities, another word for stocks, cash equities means they're cash settled, you pay cash for them, is the envy of the world. It is probably the best market structure. Market structure means like setup of rules and regulations in companies to create the best possible customer experience. So companies can go public. When companies go public, they usually choose a venue to do that on, predominantly NASDAQ, New York Stock Exchange. And then after some period, those stocks can be traded on any US exchange. There's, I believe, 16 registered SEC exchanges. Exchanges are known as lit venues, lit as in LIT, light, meaning anyone can view the market data. And then there are countless other what are called alternative trading venues. There's ATSs, alternative trading systems. There are wholesalers. It is a rather complex system, but essentially you have all these venues that match buyers and sellers of stocks. We keep it simple and talk about equities. And that would be like Apple, Google, Amazon, as well as other products like ETFs, and which are baskets of stocks. And it's a very competitive market structure. And what competition creates is tight spreads. And a spread is the delta between a buy and a sell price. And because there are so much liquidity, which means interest in buying and selling equities, and there are so many venues that compete to deliver the best possible price, means that buying or selling a stock, even 20, 30 years ago, became almost free to do if you were a participant. And brokers like Robinhood's a brokerage, TD Ameritrade's a brokerage, Schwab is a brokerage. Their job is to connect the end user, myself, you, anyone that has a mobile phone or a computer that wants to link a bank account and begin investing and saving for college or whatever's next, that links that participant to the global markets, or in this case, the US online equities system. And the amazing thing what a brokerage does is, because there's a rule called Reg NMS, which was passed, I believe, in 2007, it basically said that if you're a broker, you have a duty to find the best possible execution for your customer. And that means that no stock trade can happen outside of the NBBO, National Best Bidder Offer. So take all the 16 exchanges right now, and there's bids and offers, people trying to buy and sell all of these equities. Take the highest possible bid to buy Apple across all 16. Take the lowest possible offer, so someone trying to sell Apple, across all 16. And that creates a synthetic NBBO, National Best Bidder Offer. And usually, even for a $150 stock, that's only a penny wide, which means you could buy Apple for $150.01, and you can sell Apple for $150. And brokerages have a duty to execute all trades within the NBBO. And it was the advent of Robinhood and making stock trading completely commission free. It used to cost you $10 to do so even 10, 15 years ago. And now, transacting truly in the online stock market is essentially free. And Robinhood really democratized that and brought the power of that through a sleek mobile UI to customers. So that's what Robinhood is. It is a brokerage, and a brokerage connects users to the online stock exchange structure. And stock exchanges are venues, electronic venues that match buyers and sellers.
So then and again, we should get into sports betting more generally, but how does that concept apply to what you created with Smart? How are you doing that in terms of matching buyers and sellers from a sports betting perspective?
I would say the coolest thing about Sporttrade is, going back to like when I wanted to start the business, I'm like, okay, I want to create this exchange. And I kind of already established in my mind that a sports bet and buying a share of stock is pretty identical. And if I could figure out how to build a stock market, I could figure out how to build a sports betting exchange. That seems pretty easy, right? Figure out how the stock market works. Is there are people that have dedicated decades of their professional career and are still learning the best way to build a stock exchange. And what ended up happening was I ended up connecting with all these people in the online sports betting community, just learning about the friction that customers have in placing sports bets. And I was not surprised to find out that the same sort of friction that customers were reporting to me they were experiencing in that day and age, in real time, were the same issues that stock traders used to, face 40 years ago. And that is wide spreads. We talked about the tight spread of being able to buy Apple at $150.01 and sell it at $150, essentially completely free to trade, very tight spread. Lack of access, unable to trade desired size.
Before we do that, what's like a typical, spread in a sports bet? If it's like 1 cent for a stock trade, what would you say is a typical spread, or was when you first started the company?
Yeah. So the typical spread in a stock trade is about 1/100%.
Right.
The typical spread in a sports bet, and let's keep it simple, a straight sports bet, I want to bet on the Eagles or I want to bet the over, is 4.7%.
Yeah.
You're talking about 47,000x the fees.
Yeah.
Because there is no competition in sports betting in the same way. There were no online sports betting exchanges where there was competition. And one of the key reasons why, and one of the key reasons that really made the stock markets in the 70s and 80s and 90s more competitive, is that more and more participants, and ultimately in the early 2000s, were able to enter a limit order. And a limit order is like, hey, I don't want to just transact at the best available price. I want to choose the price at which I want to transact. I don't want to buy Apple at $150.01. I want to buy it at $149.99. And when multiple participants enter limit orders, it collapses in the spread even more. And so between like 95 and 2005, there was this unprecedented shrinkage of spreads to the point where the online stock markets started to produce prices in what were called decimals. There was this decimalization that happened during the 90s, where stocks used to trade in eighths of a dollar, or then 16ths of a dollar, or then 30 seconds of a dollar. So Apple might be 116th bid at 101. And as spreads started to collapse, it didn't really make sense to use fractions. It made more sense to use actual decimals, pennies. And now the conversation is about going to 100th of a penny or 1,000th of a penny. That is how competitive the stock market is. And so I thought, to myself, it would make a lot of sense if I could build an exchange for sports betting, that I could solve the same problems that were solved for retail traders 30 years ago and 10 years ago with the advent of Robinhood for sports bettors. And so that was the general sort of concept. I connected with a lot of bettors and learned about their issues. And through that, I met who is now our largest investor. And they were one of the largest high frequency trading market makers on the world's largest stock exchanges. And they started as sports bettors. And it was through that relationship where I basically learned how to build a stock exchange. And fast forward to 2020, they made their first investment in Sporttrade. And they said, "Hey, Alex, we have a guy that could build the exchange." I'm like, "Great, who is it?" They said, "It's John Ross." I'm like, "Well, no, not that John Ross, not the John Ross that built, what is the online, market microstructure that almost every exchange is built on." And they said, "No, yes, that John Ross." And so got very lucky, but ended up meeting just from the network and the community, meeting John. And John was the CTO at NASDAQ. He wrote their matching engine, and he wrote our matching engine. And when I say our platform works like a stock exchange, it is pretty much a carbon copy of the NASDAQ stock exchange, except for you're not buying shares of Apple, you're buying a share of the Phillies to win. And the market structure is almost exactly the same.
Yeah, I want to get back to that because that's probably a novel concept. But you mentioned a couple of things you mentioned there. One, you said that there wasn't competition, then you talked about the exchange. Yeah. When you say the competition with who exactly? You're just talking about the betting operators, or who would you say is, why are betting operators charging such high spreads?
The short answer is because they can. If the audience were to think about a sports bet, if they've heard about sports betting, have heard about, minus 110. That when you think about an NFL point spread, usually the book finds the handicap, and the handicap is an amount of points to give to or take away from a team such that it's basically a 50-50 proposition. So let's take Eagles versus the Giants. Eagles might be minus 3.5. So take Eagles final score, minus 3.5 points, and match it up to the Giants final score. And obviously the higher score wins the bet. And usually you have minus 110 is the predominant sort of price that you have to pay for your side. That means you're betting 110 to win 100, which means you're betting 110 to return 210. If you take 110 and divide it by 210, you get roughly 52.4%. So you're paying 52.4% for a proposition that the bookmaker knows is a 50% chance winning. So now turn that back into a stock trade. You're paying $52.4 for a share for a stock that's worth 50. Ooh, huge spreads. There's where your 4.76% comes in. You're overpaying for that asset by about 4.76%, which is 52.4 divided by 50 minus 1. And the reason bookmakers do it is that no one in the ecosystem can say, "Hey, wait a minute, I think that this asset is worth 50%, not 52.4%. So I would want to pay 50% for Eagles minus 3. You can't do that on a sports book. There's no way for you to put in what's called a limit order. And so sports books simply don't allow customers to enter their own prices. And that's how the stock market used to work 40, 50 years ago. And that's why spreads were super wide. There was no way for you as a participant to say, I don't want to pay this for Apple. I want to pay this for Apple. Think about millions of people doing that at the same time. Spreads get very tight. That's the first reason. The second reason, less practically, more figuratively, is that a lot of people look at sports betting as entertainment, as they should. Sports betting is entertainment. It is not a way to make money. It's not an investing tool or instrument. And they're less sensitive around price. And because there's not the same regulatory rigor around consumer protection in sports betting as there is in financial trading, there's no sets of rules like I talked about Reg NMS earlier, which is a regulation that forced a broker to get the best possible price for their customer, whether they were buying or selling Apple or any other stock. That also doesn't exist in sports betting. So if, MGM is offering a price where you have to, buy the Eagles -3.5 at 52.4%, but DraftKings is offering at 51.2%, which is -105. And you bet on MGM, you're going to get 52.4%. You have literally overpaid by $1.20, 1.2% for placing that bet. And there's nothing that operators have to do to give you that best execution. And they want to create as captive as a customer as possible. And so what they tend to do is they give you a lot of bonuses and they put a lot of things in your face and they kind of distract from the fact that pricing is very bad. And it works for the most part because customers aren't really aware that, well, if you bet 3 times a week, that percentage really starts to add up. And so those are the two reasons. One, bookmakers don't allow you to enter your own price. And two, for the most part, a lot of people aren't really aware that getting the best price really matters because they've never had to think about that before. When they make a stock trade, it just works for them and it's super efficient. And sports betting is not regulated at all in the same.
It's a really interesting point, is that maybe stock trading has influenced the spreads. Actually would have been a good point to put in our article that I had you featured in. That's a really interesting idea. Something I think we could explore in more detail. But the second part you brought up before we get directly into sport trade is market making. Again, I don't think the audience is as familiar. You've kind of talked about it, and like obviously the stock markets are kind of a way of describing market making. But can you talk about the concept of market making and how it applies in stocks, and then how it applies in your business?
Yep. So I'll go back again to when I was at Drexel. I remember sitting, just graduating, like, all right, there was just before graduation. I'm sitting in the finance course, and on the main floor of the Jerry C. LeBeau Hall in Philly, which is the name of the building of the LeBeau School at Drexel, is a stock ticker. Now all these logos, GE, GM, Apple, Mondelez International, PepsiCo. And there was a stock price and whether it was up or down and by how much percent. I remember looking at that and thinking to myself, how the hell, what does that mean that Pepsi's trading $68.40? Who sets that price? Is that the price at which shares were just bought or sold? Is that the price at which I could buy Pepsi? Is that the price at which I could sell Pepsi? I had no idea. I had been a finance student for 4 years. And if I went to any other student in the finance program, I said, what does that mean that Pepsi's trading $68.40? They would all say the same thing. They would say, well, that's what the market believes it's worth. And that's a free cash flow discounted back. I'm like, no. Practically, where did that $68.40 come from? Why is it not $68.41? Why is it not $68.30, $68.39? Why is it $68.40? And so that began my sort of foray into learning how prices come to be. And if you think about what a stock exchange is, it's simply just a venue that lists PepsiCo and then matches buyers and sellers. But in order for there to be a trade on PepsiCo, a buyer and a seller have to agree on a price. And so in order for a buyer and seller to agree on a price, one of those two parties has to offer that price or bid that price. And the other counterparty has to agree to that price. And even in the stock market, if you take natural buyers and sellers, so me, you, anyone that uses a retail brokerage, there's not really enough of us for how quickly prices move to play both sides of that transaction, to play both the liquidity providing side. Oh, I'm willing to buy PepsiCo at $68.40, as well as the liquidity taking side. Oh, great. I'll sell PepsiCo. I have 10 shares to sell, $68.40, done. We as retail investors, we usually just take what is available. And that's just easy. It's easy to think about. There's no education required. Oh, I want to, Pepsi's up 10% today, sell, boom, done. And so, okay, well, if retail investors aren't going to play that liquidity provision, liquidity providing side of the market, someone needs to, because without that, no one's going to transact. You're going to have a bunch of people willing to transact, but waiting for prices to populate. And that is why market makers are so critical. Market makers facilitate natural buyers and sellers. Market makers are always willing to both buy and sell, in this example, PepsiCo, any instrument on an exchange list at a spread. So a market maker might say, okay, PepsiCo, I believe PepsiCo is worth around $68.40. So I'll be willing to buy 1,000 shares at $68.39. And at the same time, I'm willing to sell 1,000 shares at $68.41. And it's that spread, and it's the existence of multiple market makers all competing on that spread that creates a vibrant marketplace. So without the market maker, the exchange is worthless because it just sits there and it's a technology platform that's willing to match buyers and sellers. But if there's no one willing to kind of be the party starter and take that first step, no one's ever going to transact. That is what a market maker is. And it is 2:44 here p.m. Eastern time, which means the stock market is open. And if all market makers on the NASDAQ and NYSE today, in the next minute, decided to turn off their systems, entire financial system would collapse. That is how important market makers are. Yeah. And so less important in the sports betting sense, because again, it's entertainment, but the same general concept. Without them, there's no liquidity. Without any liquidity, who are people going to transact against? For you and I, we want it to be simple. We want, hey, I want to sell PepsiCo. Hey, I want to buy PepsiCo. Boom, done. Market makers do all that hard work of finding out what the true price of PepsiCo is. And they take a very, 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 very slim spread for facilitating that transaction.
So let's get into your business then. So obviously we've talked around it a little bit and you've mentioned it, but just can you provide just a description of how you've applied kind of market making, stock trading to sports betting and what Sporttrade is and how it kind of changes the paradigm and directly addresses those friction points that you mentioned?
Yep. So Sporttrade is a sports betting exchange. So we are the exchange that matches buyers and sellers. And we are the brokerage. We are the mobile app, whether that's Android or iOS, that connects you to your bank, allows you to deposit, allows you to set responsible gambling limits, allows you to create an account, and allows you to place orders. We take those orders and we submit it to the exchange, where we execute them, and then we send them back to the client and say, great, you just made your bet on the Phillies or the Bears or whatever. And the instrumentation that is used is something that's called a share. And a share is simply $100 of potential return. That if I wanted to buy, let's say the Phillies are playing the Nationals, that the price at which I could buy or sell the Phillies is going to be representative of the market's estimated projection of the probability of the Phillies to beat the Nationals. So knowing that the Phillies to win share pays out $100 if the Phillies win, the price to buy the Phillies share or sell a Phillies share may be $68 per share, which means the market believes they have a 68% chance of winning. That if I buy one share of the Phillies at $68, I'm risking 68 to win 32. And at any time, this is really the magic of Sporttrade, because it's a real-time marketplace, every single pitch, market makers on the platform are receiving that data and changing what they think the true price of the Phillies to win is. So if the Phillies start out at a 60% chance of winning and I buy one share of the Phillies, then the Phillies take down the Nationals 1, 2, 3 in the top of the first inning. Maybe the chance of them winning goes to 72%. And so now as an investor, as a sports bettor, what I bought for 68 is now worth 72. And I can actually sell the share I bought at 68 for 72, make a profit, have no more risk, and get out of my position. So Sporttrade facilitates real-time transactions between buyers and sellers, and it's all enabled by the exchange technology that we built, as well as our partnerships with market makers that flood every single thing we list. It could be Phillies to win, Nationals to win, over 8.5 runs, under 8.5 runs. Phillies to win the World Series, Phillies to lose the World Series. All of the things we list are two-sided markets, and customers at any point are able to buy and sell into the market. And the price is simply just a function of the probability. And that's all enabled by a share, which is essentially a futures contract that settles at 100 if the outcome occurs and settles at 0 if the outcome doesn't occur. That's what Sporttrade is.
And how were you able to get, you talk about the importance of market makers. How are you able, this is a novel product idea. How were you able to get market makers into the platform to be able to facilitate these trades?
A lot of alignment and a lot of, a shared alignment really on what sports betting could look like. If you think about sports betting now, even now, the transaction costs are so high. In-play betting is there and it's growing, but the transaction costs even go up even more. People really like the concept of cashing out, that I bought the Phillies at 68, I sold them at 72. Even that's not really novel. It's cashing out your bet. But bookmakers tend to offer really poor, crappy cash outs. At times, there's no ability to cash out. So you as a customer really aren't in control of your bet. And so there's this, for us, like a shared vision on what sports betting could look like if we both, between the exchange, i.e. Sporttrade, and the market maker, did their jobs really well. And doing our jobs really well means the exchange, Sporttrade, getting licenses, setting up our business, being able to host all the technology that transacts, between that matches buyers and sellers, build all the mobile app, acquire customers, which is a critical key Sporttrade in any online sports betting platform. And the market maker, can they actually provide a tighter quote than any other bookmaker? Because if they could provide a tighter quote and we can facilitate fairer and faster transaction, and we can enable a customer activity that you can't do anywhere else, and we can make customers aware of that, the idea is we can build a really, really big business. And we fundamentally believe that. So the way we were able to kind of get market makers involved was to have them participate on the cap table of the business, that if they could help us facilitate awesome transactions, a ton of transactions at a very low price, just as a line in, a line in the sand, customers on our platform, inclusive of commissions, which is how we make money, pay around 1% on every single bet. And in the industry, it's anywhere between 7 and 10%. So it's about, 5 to 10 times cheaper to transact on Sporttrade, than we could create a big business. And so there had to be that alignment for the market maker to say, well, I may not make money in the first year, 2 years, providing these ultra tight quotes, but if I view that more as a marketing investment in the overall platform, then by me doing that and facilitating these transactions at a low cost, I might not make a ton of money on the bid-ask spread, the price at which I'm willing to buy and sell the Phillies. But if the value of Sporttrade can grow and I own a piece of that, I'm willing to do that. And that to me is the most feasible way of trying to build a new platform in a new space that's very competitive, is to create that alignment with all parties to say, hey, we want to make this platform as big as possible. And that was not a novel idea, really. That's how multiple exchanges, BATS Exchange, as well as Members Exchange, which is now a regulated SEC stock exchange, have built their venues. They've partnered with banks and brokers and market makers, and they said, we all want to bring as much flow as possible to this venue. So let's all be a share on the upside of the success of the business.
And you mentioned customer acquisition. How did you acquire customers, or have you gotten the word out about Sporttrade, and what's been the response?
So this has been the area where we've learned, and I think I've learned the most. Initially, when we launched Sporttrade in New Jersey in September of 2022, we started at where I think ultimately Sporttrade will be perceived over time, which is we're this new fancy marketplace where you can buy and sell based on the changing probabilities of any sporting event. And even when we launched, it's a very compelling product. And what I learned very quickly was that sports bettors speak in a bit of a different language. Sports bettors prefer what's called the American odds system. Sports bettors have been predisposed to never cash out because it's so historically bad, the sports book.
Yeah.
What we learned is that while those are very solvable issues for customers via our offering, they require education and time. And it's a very noisy world. And so how do we slightly pivot our brand and our message so that we can be fundamentally solving a problem for the customer first, as opposed to teaching them a new way to bet? And if we can solve a problem first, then we can teach them a new way to bet later. And so now, almost 100% of the interest in the sport trade and 100% of the marketing investment that we make is for higher volume bettors that are banned or limited. I didn't even mention that. The traditional sports book, myself included, I'm not even like a successful bettor. If you aren't losing your money fast enough, the bookmaker can decide, well, you're not going to be able to bet $100 in this event. You're going to be able to bet $30. And that's it. Can't bet any more on this, which I think is insane. And so we really pivoted sport trade to be the place where in the finance world, in the finance syntax, our spreads are tighter. In the sports betting world, we have the best odds. In the finance world, we're able to facilitate transactions with zero friction. In the sports betting world, we have zero delay in play bet. And so we've really pivoted to those two things. We have the best prices, the best odds, and zero delay in play betting. And our average bet on our platform is over $400 per bet. The majority of our customers are limited or banned or other venues. 60% of our transactions, 60% of the bets happen after the game starts, which is about double of any other platform in the US. I do believe in-play betting is the future of betting. And I hopefully think that with the technology and the user experience we offer, we can really catalyze that in the US. In Europe, 90% of the bets in some sports happen in play. And in the US, it's less than a third of that. And so that is our customer acquisition message. Those are the customers that care the most about sport trade: high volume bettors, professional bettors, avid bettors, price sensitive bettors that look for more of a value experience in sports betting as opposed to a fun experience in sports betting. Not to say sport trade isn't fun. And again, I think it's more fun. We are solving a problem for customers that say, hey, you have the best price for Phillies, so I'm going to bet the Phillies on sport trade.
Yeah. Two final questions as we get towards the end of the time at an end of our conversation. That is the one question you were talking kind of, maybe we talked about it in the column that I wrote, but the sharp problem, right? Where people are getting banned from sports books. How does, you started to talk about this, but can you provide more detail about, particularly high volume traders or high value bettors who are successful bettors, how that works on the exchange and how that is different from betting against the house, and how you can kind of facilitate potentially an increase in those bettors on your platform?
Yep. So as an example, on our platform here, just looking at our trades, the last 10 minutes, the last 4 bets were $660, $757, $485, and $250 on, let's see, WNBA, MLB, and the Memorial, the golf tournament. The reason that we don't limit bettors is kind of 2 reasons. One is it's in our ethos not to do that. So we didn't really build the system to allow for it. There's really nothing in our system way we built it that would like screen an order before it hits the exchange. And that's how the stock market works. If you, Adam, wanted to go buy 100 shares of Apple right now and you went on TD Ameritrade and you submitted the order, there's nothing that any potential counterparty can do to you or to know who you are or where you are or your intent to either buy or sell until a transaction occurs. And so there's no protection for those market makers or any other participant in the ecosystem against which your order will transact. In a sportsbook world, it's totally opposite. MGM, DraftKings, FanDuel, they know who you are the second you log on. They know what markets you're browsing, and then when you submit an order, it's already predetermined whether they're really going to take a true bet from you or they're going to limit how much you can bet. Or in some cases, they can take your bet, they could put it in limbo for upwards of a minute, and then change the odds and decide not to give you the bet. And that's all based on the fact that they have your betting history They know what sports you got to bet on. They know whether you're profitable or not in certain sports at certain times. And so there's this huge edge they have on you in determining whether they want to accept your bet or not. And technologically, Sporttrade is built just like a stock exchange. It has no ability to do that whatsoever. Takes an order. Can the user afford this order? Are they using the platform responsibly? Are you set responsible gaming settings on our platform, such as individual bet size limit, spend limit, time limit, deposit limit? If you're in the state of New Jersey, if you've adhered to all our responsible gaming limits and you have the balance to submit the order, there is nothing stopping it. And so fundamentally, that is the why behind Sporttrade's inability to screen or limit or severely alter the experience for any one customer on the platform versus any other customer on our platforms.
Yeah, and again, I think this is something we could probably talk about in a future podcast, but that's a competitive advantage that you have. The people who are most likely or sharp bettors who would make a lot of trades are actually revenue generating for your Sporttrade in ways they're obviously not for sports books, which is a significant competitive advantage. So we're into the end of time. And the last question on your LinkedIn page, it says we're hiring. We like to ask all of our guests, what are you, well, a lot of our, like I mentioned, a lot of our audience is looking to get into the sports industry or just starting in the sports industry. What are you looking for when you're looking to hire folks for Sporttrade? What are some of the qualities, features, characteristics you're thinking about, particularly given that you're a growing business?
Yeah. The first thing I would say is that if you happen to stumble across my LinkedIn profile, just send me a DM. I will respond. We'll set up time and we can chat about whatever. I always like doing that. In terms of the type of folks we're looking for, right now we're hiring for ambassadors. We find that one of the most effective forms of customer acquisition is when we can be with the customer and really show them how magical and amazing the platform is. And in terms of the traits of people that we look for across the organization, we look for intellectually curious people, kind people, and you don't have to have any experience in trading or betting. I didn't when I started. So if I didn't, it would be really unfair for me to enforce that upon anyone else in the company. And people that really want and enjoy the challenge of creating something new. If that is a skill set or an interest that anyone has, then it can be perfectly applied into almost every role that we have at Sporttrade. So that's the kind of type of person we look for. Right now, we are hiring for ambassadors, and it's a great way to be introduced to the business, to understand the customer, which is the most important, stakeholder in the entire ecosystem to us. Everything flows from the customer. And then from there, we've had people move into CX roles, marketing roles, product roles, design roles. And I'm sure over time that wouldn't preclude technical roles like a developer or an engineer.
Well, Alex, is a great place to leave it. I think there's definitely some more meat on the bone, and we would like to have you back, particularly as we anticipate Sporttrade growing, given all the things that you talked about. But thank you for your time today. Thanks for being on the Revenue Above Replacement podcast, and really appreciate your insights, particularly on a novel space.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. And I really love the name Revenue Above Replacement. It brings me back to that Moneyball sort of thing I love that name. So thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for joining.